Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or good day wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the next episode of No Dice, No Glory. Sponsored by our jobs that actually pay us money, we're coming to you not at all live from an abandoned arms factory deep under a mountain in West Virginia. We are proud to proffer to you the finest in wargaming coverage. Without any further ado, let's get this show on the road.
Well, thank you very much, Sean, for the amazing interview. And today we have a special guest with us today. Kind of interesting how we found this this interviewee, but I was very happy that Phalanx Games reached out to us, and they said, you may want to talk to one of our recent designers. So I'm going to introduce Andrew, who's behind the game Coalitions that is on Kickstarter. And when this comes out, I think you'll have about a week left to get in on it. So welcome, Andrew. How you doing this morning?
Fine, thanks. Yes, nice to meet you, Mitch. Thanks for having me on.
Nice to meet you too. So people are going to have to, usually my voice is annoying and grating. So they're just going to have to put up with me with a little bit of cold. It's July, and that's when I decide to get sick. So not really good for me. But yeah, so happy to have you here. So let's go over your wargaming background and creds.
Yeah, well, I suppose I started like a lot of people as a sort of teenager. I started back in the 1980s, board gaming, things like Axis and Allies, that type of board game. That's probably what got me into it. Really went down the route of figure gaming more than board gaming. So through the 80s, 90s, did a lot of Napoleonic mainly figure gaming. Used to use a set of rules called Empire Rules by the Emperor's Press. I think they're based in Chicago.
They are, yeah.
Chicago, yeah. Scott Bowden and Tarbuck, and Jim Getz. And I absolutely loved them. I mean, I played them for like 10 years constantly. Really detailed rules down to sort of down to the company level, not even battalion level. You'd have different morale for your grenadiers and for the voltigeurs, and as well as your centre company. So it was like really detailed. It'd take you about a month to play a game, but it was great. I really like that. Then sort of opened up into more areas. So mainly Napoleonics to start with, but then through Guildford Wargame Clubs, where I'm in England, live just outside Guildford, which is about 20 miles outside London.
I know where it is.
Sorry?
I know where that is.
You know where that is? Yeah, Guildford. It's a great place. Yeah, we've got a fantastic War Games club there with loads of members, really active. So through that, got involved in almost every period of sort of war games, biblical, chariots, and right the way up into sort of futuristic space stuff. But loads of First World War, Russian Civil War, been very interested in that. Second World War, obviously, quite a bit of ancient Roman stuff, that type of thing. So played lots of periods over 20 odd years or so through the club. And it's only really sort of the last 10 years or so that I've got more involved in board gaming as opposed to figure gaming. And again, that's through the club, really. People at the club introducing games that get you playing and get you interested. And that's how I kind of ended up where I am now, really. I've been a war gamer probably 35, 40 years.
Yeah. So everybody should know out there two things. One is that yes, we're old. The second one is, and I'll tell our usual listeners, the three people that listen to us all the time, is that no, I did not know he was a fan of Great War Gaming, because that's a huge passion of mine. So I do have a question though about that miniatures game. I forgot the name already. What scale was that? Empire. That was small scale, right?
Yeah. It was basically a battalion level. It was a 1 to 60 ratio for figures. So one figure represented 60 men, but you'd represent every battalion. I've refought many battles using it. Probably the biggest one, obviously, everybody wants to do Waterloo. So I set Waterloo up in in the loft of the house that I was living in at the time, and me and my brother-in-law played every Wednesday evening for a year using the Empire rules to get to a conclusion of the battle. I mean, it literally took that long because, every single battalion on the in the battle was represented, and we still came up with the same result. The Prussians came at the end and saved the bacon for the British.
Yeah, they ruined everything.
Yeah. So after a whole year of labour, we ended up with a totally historic result, which I thought was great. They're really good rules.
What scale are the miniatures in that one?
So at that stage, I was using 15mm figures.
Uh-huh.
Probably until about 10, 15 years ago, I actually did all my figure wargaming in 15mm. But as you get a bit older, it gets harder and harder to see things. So I've sort of progressed now to 28mm figures. So I've got quite a large collection of 28mm Napoleonics mainly, covering most of the major nations in the wars. And we do that now. We're really fortunate being in a really kind of good active club. Obviously, COVID has put the kibosh on a bit of stuff at the moment, but we would regularly play kind of all day Saturday games with about 14 players, 7 aside. And we now use rules by Sam Mustafa called Blucher, which are at the brigade level. And they are fantastic rules for reenacting huge battles. We did the whole of the second day of Leipzig with every brigade represented, 14 players, and we did it all in a day. Whereas, it took me nearly a year to play Waterloo before. So
we love Sam here. We were supposed to actually have him on to talk about LaSalle 2. And
I just started playing LaSalle 2. For about the last 4 weeks, I've been playing it. I really like them. Good set of rules.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to. We actually scheduled it a while ago, but the guy that was doing the interview, everybody was sick. So I don't want you to think everybody in America is sick. Mentally, yeah. But yeah, he makes some great games, and you bring up something that is so important to our community. Is a good club is such the key to it. And you said we get each other into it. I look at it as we get each other addicted to it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so it was a year to do Waterloo. The battle took place in roughly a day. So that was a lot of fun. But the same historical result. That means the rules were really good, or the generals on each side were really influenced by history, which kind of leads us into wargame and to talk about coalitions. I love Napoleonic gaming. I got into it, I'd say later on. I have Picton's 3rd Division Plus in 18mm, and
Fantastic.
I need to get it to the table more. And then I decided, I don't know why I did this, but I went and got. I have 150 French and 150 British 28mm. And I painted it without really a game to play. But I've been trying Sharp Practice, which is a really good game from the TFL guys by you.
Yeah, Two Fat Lardies.
Yeah. They're, I like their punny names for some of their games. They're fun guys. So I got the rules for coalitions. It has 13 days as of today, but this will come out Tuesday. So you still have plenty of time to get into it on Kickstarter. It looks like it's funded, but it looks like it's still kind of going strong. You're coming up on almost 1,000 backers probably by when this thing's over, man. That's really cool.
Yeah, it seems to be building momentum. It funded quite quick, and Phalanx have been doing a great job of kind of introducing some add-ons and some expansions and so on. And I think that's really getting people's imagination going. They've added, the game comes with a free expansion for the Ancient Regime, which is basically covering the War of Austrian Succession, 7 years war period. And that comes free with the game as part of the Kickstarter.
You're going to make me spend money.
But yeah, and then I think a day or so. I mean, obviously this is going to come out in a few days' time. But about a day or two ago, they released basically a standalone game, which is like an expansion. It's using the same system, but it's a completely separate game. based on the 30 Years' War. And with the two sides, instead of being sort of the French and the British forming coalitions, it's kind of based on the Protestants fighting the Catholics around the 30 Years' War, with Poland and Spain being playable nations. And so there would be a 7-player rather than a 6-player. So the Kickstarter has effectively got this Napoleonic game on it, but it's also got a 30 Years' War game on it as well, using this effectively the same system.
I'm about to hit pledge. This hobby is one thing to make us poor. So, I looked through coalitions. It reminded me of a computer game I played, Napoleon at War. But then, like, looking through the rules, there's a lot more there. I'll tell you what, the first thing I liked about it is, like, the fact that you can play it anywhere from 2 to, I believe, 6 players. 1 to 6 players.
Yeah.
So, I'm just going to ask, like, where the inspiration for this game come from, and tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so it's a sort of an area control kind of. I think the Americans like to call it dudes on a map type of game.
Yeah.
I think probably I was when I was about 19 or so. I played diplomacy with my brother-in-law a couple of times. It was just 2 of us playing it, which is not good to play diplomacy with 2 players.
Yeah.
And also the problem with diplomacy is I've played it since a few times in the last sort of few years. The problem can be there's because everything's kind of written orders, and you can form sort of secret pacts and alliances with different players, and you don't really know what's going on half the time with other people. You can play 2 or 3 or 4 turns into the game, and then you suddenly realise that somebody you thought was your ally and your friend has actually been totally backstabbing you the whole time. They're doing something with somebody else, and it can leave a bit of a bad feeling and make you think, well, why have I been bothering? This is, So it's got a bit of a reputation for a friendship destroyer, and I think it could be. I like the game. I love the elegance of the game. I love the fact it was kind of like one army moves one space, and everything does one. I just love that kind of idea of it. So I wanted to make a game that had all of the good things about, like, the changes of coalition, the being able to negotiate terms with people and do stuff, but I wanted it to be as transparent as possible, so everybody could see effectively what's going on with these deals. Even they can't kind of prevent them, but they can see what's happening, and so you can constantly react to the situation on the table depending on who you perceive is doing what with who and who's helping who. But the mechanics of forming the coalition and the mechanics of having to choose what I initially started calling an enabler, but we're now kind of calling an allower or activator. I think the name for it might change, but basically you have to choose someone to allow you to move. And thematically that makes absolutely no sense at all, and I totally get that. But it's a negotiation diplomatic game, and so what I wanted to do is introduce, tie in basically movement with diplomacy in one mechanic. So the act of actually choosing who you're going to choose as your enabler, your allower, the person who's going to allow you to move, that's kind of telling everyone around the board who is your friend. And then they can allow you to move from 1 to 3 times. So if they're allowing you to move 3 times, then it's definitely proclaiming that they are your friend and you're helping each other. But you have to choose from your enemies. You can't choose anyone that's in the same coalition as you. So anyone that is openly your friend, you can't choose to be your allower. You have to choose one of your enemies. And because it's a game of diplomacy and negotiation and trying to get the best situation on the board, you're constantly trying to decide of my potential enemies, which one out there can I deal with the best, and which one's going to give me the best terms, who's got the most to gain from negotiation and so on. So it's a very, very open structure. It's completely transparent. Everyone can see what's going on all the time, so there's no bad feeling. And yet the whole negotiation kind of diplomatic part of the game is the key to the gameplay. There is kind of movement and battles, but they are kind of as a result of how you're negotiating and who you're choosing to be in a coalition with. So I certainly had inspiration from the game Diplomacy, but hopefully I've developed it in a different way to make it.
So do I, if I'm playing this game with 6 people, do I do the wheeling and dealing of diplomacy in front of everybody, or am I doing, hey, let's go over here and talk for a bit?
No, you're doing it in front of everyone, because effectively what happens is when it's your turn to move, you have to choose someone that is not in your coalition to allow you to move. And you have to choose that openly across the table. So you could say to them, if I choose you, will you allow me to move? And they say, oh, yeah, I'll allow you to move. I'll allow you to move 3 times. It's absolutely fine. So you could then choose them. They don't then have to stick to it. They could allow you to move for the first time. And then when you say, can I go again? They could suddenly say, well, actually, I've changed my mind now. Now, seeing what you're doing, I'm not going to allow you to go. So everybody can observe what the negotiation is. There's, if you sort of go off into a corner with one other player and say, well, let's do this and let's do that and let's do this, you still have to go back and do it completely openly in front of everyone. So everyone is able to see that you're choosing this other player and they're allowing you to move 3 times, and then they choose you and you allow them to move 3 times. But the only way you can do that is actually by being in opposite sides. You have to, there's 4 statuses you can be in. You can be in a British coalition, you could be in a French coalition, you can be neutral, or you can effectively be in a war of aggression, which is basically you're on your own and you're fighting everyone. So if you're in the British coalition, you cannot choose anyone else in the British coalition to let you go. You have to choose someone either in the French coalition who you're actually fighting, someone who's neutral, or someone that's in this kind of war of expansion. But all those other players in that turn are actually kind of against you. And so they may say they're going to let you do stuff and then they won't, or so there's plenty of room for manoeuvring, but it is all in the open. Everyone can see it happening.
So what happens if you're there and like all the players just say no one after another?
Okay, so effectively when it's your movement turn, you can have up to 3 movement rounds if you're permitted, but all nations can always move once. Okay. But you still have to choose someone. So I don't know, let's say everybody forms a British coalition to fight the French. So all the other 5 nations are all in the British coalition and all against France. France is on its own. So all those 5 nations are all going to have to ask France to move. And France has to allow them to move once. But he's never going to allow them to move more than once. He's never going to allow them to move twice or 3 times because they're effectively his enemy. So by choosing this player to allow you to move, that player is actually gaining something. The way that combats work is you have your army on the table and you have kind of combat cards that you can pledge towards the strength of the army. And to be able to play these combat cards, you need morale. There's a scale on the side of the board that is like a morale scale. When you're chosen as the enabler, for every time you let somebody else move, you gain morale. So if the Prussians ask the Ottomans to be able to move, if they move once, the Ottomans will gain 1 morale. If they say, can I move again for a second time? And the Ottomans say yes, then the Ottomans gain 2 more morale. So they've now gained 3 morale. So you've gained on the board because you've been able to move twice. And the Ottomans have gained because they're actually becoming stronger. They're going to be able to fight in battles better because they've got more morale, allows them to play more cards. And so as the moving player, you're judging whether you're giving this enemy of yours too much power because they've got too much morale. It means they're going to be stronger in battles. Right. Or whether it's worth giving them that extra morale because that will improve your position on the board, which is what you want. So there's a constant judging of whether you're getting enough compared to the person you're asking, if they're getting enough from the deal.
Yeah, so I looked through the rules, and the way you mentioned it, I want people to make sure that you can't just sit there and say no all the time. But when I read the rules, I think playing a neutral country is really advantageous in this game.
Yeah, it can be. There's reasons to go neutral. There's disadvantages and there's advantages. One time that you'd go neutral is if your nation's been invaded. First of all, if you lose your capital, then you are forced to surrender and you're forced into neutrality for that turn. But if you are getting overrun and you're in a lot of bother, one way of kind of getting yourself out of it is by going neutral for the coming turn. And what that does is it's basically like you've kind of surrendered, you've had a peace treaty, which means that the occupying powers, the people who are attacking you, basically pack up and go home. They forced you into neutrality. They're going to gain because any disputed regions that they've captured, they'll be able to keep. But they take away their garrisons from your original territory. So going neutral will give you kind of a respite. It stops people, if everyone's attacking you, effectively they can't attack you. And also, whilst you're neutral, you'll get double your income regions that you control will raise sort of income for like taxation, which you can then spend on troops and stuff in mobilization. So if you're neutral, you get double that. So if you were going to get an income of say 6, you would get 12, which is really significant, because that allows you to then in mobilization build up large forces again. And then in the next turn, you then go join one of the coalitions, or you go into war of aggression, and you're in a strong position. So you can go from being really weak and being really overrun. You have a bit of a spell where you're kind of quiet and you're neutral and people tend to leave you alone. And then you can come back into the war. And what that's trying to represent, I mean, Austria, fighting the French in 1800, in 1805, in 1809, they're constantly being defeated, but they kind of lick their wounds, reform their armies and come back. Same with the Prussians after 1806, completely destroyed 1806-07. And effectively they, through their Landwehr system, they secretly rebuild their army, and come sort of 1812-13, when they change sides from the French again and start the War of Liberation, they've gone from, they were at war in 1806, they effectively neutral and a tacit ally for a few years, go into Russia with the French, and then swap sides and attack the French, which is exactly what I've tried to kind of represent in the game. You can be in the French coalition one turn, and then the next turn you can swap sides and be in the British coalition and start attacking the French. So
Yeah, I like that. So I remember playing recently with a group of people online, Here I Stand, which is another coalition game. And
Here I Stand, great game. Love Here I Stand.
Yeah, I was France, and everybody just beat up on me. Because I was like cracking jokes, the diet of verms. I was just like giving them a hard time, and I was out of the game pretty quickly. And
France is hard to play.
It is. It's it is fun. It's hard to play. What I like about this when I was reading it is there's a lot going on in this period of history. And I looked at the rules a couple times trying to find time scale. And I realized, and maybe I missed it, and if I did, just tell me. But the fact that so much can happen within a turn, and as you just explained, it covers everything that could have happened, and we're not hung up on time. Like we know, well, this is going to happen in 1806. You're not wedded to those dates. It's almost like an open sandbox for Europe at this time, and the players wheel deal until there's a victor. But it's not like, well, now it's 1812. You got to invade Russia. It really is, my opinion, an open sandbox for players. Did I get that right, or did I miss the fact that that there's a time standard?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So there is no scale in the game. There's no time scale. Also, the map. When I first designed it, and Phalanx have followed through, actually, because they kind of grasped what I was trying to get at and liked the idea, I purposely distorted the map. I think we've all played war games where, I don't know, you're doing the Second World War in Europe and it's a hex encounter, and you've got this massive map on the table and you've got 400 counters all in 2 hexes in, sort of the lowlands, and everything's all crammed into one little bit and the rest of the map's not used. And I wanted to try and avoid that. I wanted to make areas kind of disproportionately bigger when they were small, and small areas big and so on, so it was playable. So the game, so you could get your counters on, you can move stuff around, and you wasn't always knocking over piles of chips and so on. So the actual ground scale is completely irrelevant. It is, the whole idea of it is just a map that's been sketched down by someone in kind of diplomatic negotiations, and then saying, well, if you have this bit, I'll have that bit. That's the idea, without any kind of thought about, the borders of the people that are living on there, or language or ethnicity. It's just like this region, that region. And that was done on purpose. Some people have commented they don't like it. I don't think, whatever you do, you're not going to get everybody to like what you come up with.
We're war gamers. You can never make war gamers happy.
No, exactly. But as far as timescale is concerned, so if you played a full game, so if certainly on the Kickstarter video, the playthrough video and the rules, they're looking at what they call the 1805 scenario, which effectively starts everybody, there's like an influence track, which is like the victory point track, and that's how you win. And it goes from 0 to 40. And in the 1805 scenario, everyone's kind of starting at 17. But in the full game scenario, if you're starting at 1792, everyone's going to be down at 0. And what we found through loads and loads of play tests, someone will get from 0 up to 40 in about 6 turns. Normally a game will last 6 complete turns, which just happens to completely fit in beautifully with the fact that there were 6 coalitions fighting Napoleon up until 1814. Mm-hmm. This game doesn't really include the 7th coalition of the Waterloo campaign, but from the first coalition of 1792 to the last coalition of 1814, there's 6 coalitions, and the game takes 6 turns. So basically if you want to put a timescale on it, each game turn, complete turn, you could look at as the formation of one complete coalition, the fighting involved with that, and then the fallout from it at the end, kind of thing, when people then can change sides again.
I dig the no time scale. I think that's really cool. And I think too many games force you into doing historical things, because very few of us play games where we don't know the historical background. And we tend to make, war games give us the opportunity to come up with a different result. We're still biased by the history we know. And we were talking the other day, because obviously I talk to war gamers way too much. I said, I hate games that like for the Battle of Gettysburg that was fought in our Civil War. I hate games that tell me that Cemetery Hill is worth 10 victory points and I need it to win the game. I should be able to look at what's going on in the game and know that that's good high ground that I need to use to defend, and use another mechanic to record victory. I just, I like the open world of some games, and not a lot of game designers, developers are really willing to do that. So that's why from looking at it, I thought it was a really neat mechanic, because a lot of gamers, believe it or not, they look for stuff like that. You talked about the map. So I own 2 Phalanx games. I own the Days of Honor, which is about the Polish uprising in 1944, and I own U-Boot, which I keep telling people, like, that's a game that involves an app, and that's brilliant, because everybody has a phone. And believe it or not, I'm not a boomer, but we're not all untech savvy. But their games have such a nice finish to it. Like, really, they don't have a million titles, but everything so far, what I've seen, looks like a quality product. And just looking at this map, and you said some gamers don't like it. It looks, it does look a little Euro gamey, but Euro games are great.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think people, we've had some comments about the color or colors that have been chosen, and some people have commented on the names of the territories and so on. But whatever name you name a territory, somebody else will say, it should be a different name, kind of thing. And so, you're absolutely right. You've got to make some decisions and then go with what you're happy with, I think, really.
Unless you start naming like Burgundy Mitch, I think it's fine. I think once you're in the ballpark. So one of the things that you kind of covered, and it kind of ruined a question for me,
sorry.
but you said no. I love that, because it means weirdly we're on the same page. That I was looking at it. It's a board game, but the components are meeples and miniatures. So I knew, and the question I was going to ask is, well, you must have been a miniatures player at one time. Why did you guys go with the, instead of using cardboard pieces, go with the meeples and these beautiful miniatures? And the other one is, for people out there, you have these little brown Vauban forts, which I'm getting closer to backing this, and I probably will when this is all over. Why did you decide to throw that on here? Is it because it looks nice? I get that, but was that something when you started this, like, I really want to kind of mix the two worlds that you came from?
Yeah. Okay. So actually, the forts and fortifications have always been in the game from the first, when I started designing it. It was always within the design. Some of the maths behind the combats have changed slightly. in the kind of my original designs to start with, we were making unit tokens worth 3 rather than 1. And an army was worth, the army commander, the general, was worth 1, and the unit tokens were worth 3. So an army would be 10, whereas at the moment it's now changed, it's 4, because the unit tokens are 1 and the army commander's 1. Again, it's just simplifying it. And then we had a garrison that again was worth 3, but again it's gone back to being 1. And then we had these fortifications which people could purchase, and they was always expensive to purchase. So when you're doing your mobilization, you could effectively buy a fortification, and then where you had a place that was particularly vulnerable, if you'd garrisoned it, you could put the fortification down in that area. So your garrison would be garrison of fortification, and that would just give you a little bit more strength in defense. So because the way the game plays is each nation has just not got enough armies to do everything it wants. So you have to constantly think about where you're going to put your armies, what you're going to do with them, because you just haven't got enough troops to do everything. And so the fortifications were one way of thinking, okay, well, I'm going to send my armies over in this direction. I really need to cover my rear or cover my flank. What I can do is I can use this kind of garrisoned fortification as my left flank or my rear or whatever. And it won't be massively powerful, because by this period of history, fortifications weren't that much of a player. But certainly in Spain, some of the sieges that went on Spain went on for quite a while. I would say some of their names, but I'd murder them in French. But certainly Badajoz and Ciudad Rodriguez, and the French siege against the Spanish in Saragossa. These sieges went on for quite a while. And also in northern Germany, some of the fortress cities in northern Germany were really quite important centres. So even though fortresses, their day had passed by the time of the Napoleonic Wars, they still did have a value. And so I wanted to have those in the game as a kind of way of covering or being able to leave troops in a position where you didn't have to leave your armies and you could still stay slightly strong there. So they're not kind of a last minute, what should we do to add something to the game? They've always been there. But some of the maths around the value of it is probably just tweaked slightly in the development.
So
it's a great part of the game.
So folks that buy the game, you have 2 options out there. You could use the wooden meeples, which look nice in its own, and you could get the miniatures. Who did the sculpting on these miniatures? Because I know when you go to Kickstarter, that's not always how they'll look when you finally get it, but they're amazing sculptures.
Yeah. So to be honest, I'm not sure the chap that's done them. Phalanx, Voldemar and Yarrow Phalanx have got them organised. I think the ones that you're seeing are either 3D printed. Or they're kind of computer mock-ups of them. They've done about 10 sets 3D printed. I've got a set of them here, and they are really good. I mean, I've been very impressed with them. I'm actually very tempted to paint my complete set, so play with them all painted. But they're really nice. But to be honest, I'm not sure who sculpted them. I know I should know that. It's really bad of me, but
I'll tell you what I could do. We have on our site, Paolo Pagliani, who lives in Italy, and he's a master painter. So let me see if I can get him to paint those for you guys. He is. Yeah. You can hit our page. He does really good work. Yeah, I like that. I think. Look, I have U-boot. I should say it correctly, as on the box. That the sculpts in that, and you build a model U-boat. They do really good work, and some of their titles, I wish they were more popular here. And I picked up U-boot at a convention, and the guy's like, "Yeah, I got 4 boxes of these, and you're gonna get the last one." I'm like, "Yeah, it looks really neat. Phalanx really does some really good work." And it seems like when Yarrow contacted me, we have some really cool stuff coming out, and I'm like, well, anything you can do to separate me from my paycheck is kind of awesome. Because I'm at that point. I'm looking over at my games. I'm pointing. I don't know if you guys can see that, and I'm like, I hope I get these to the table. There's so many great games. But what I liked about this one, the mechanics, the artwork is amazing on those cards. Was that there's very few games that you can actually have 6 players at a table, and there's something about that, especially during COVID. we played Berlin '85 from SPI last night, which we played with 3 people, but it's a 2-player game, and that's why Here I Stand and Versailles 1919 from GMT were so fun to play because they were multiplayer games, where there's a little of perfidy going on between the players. This is a true 6-player game, but there's a solo version, and from reading the rules, it looks like it works. How did you do the solo version where, sometimes when a designer creates a game, they don't translate well to solo play. This one seems to have figured that out.
It's okay. So I'm going to say straight away, it is a really good solo game, and then I'm going to follow that statement with, "I didn't design it."
Okay.
So yeah. So obviously, Phalanx had the game for a year and a half or so. And they'd been developing it, and we've been talking a lot about the different things. And I mean, basically, it's a negotiation game with diplomacy, and there's combat as part of kind of your negotiations and diplomacy. So it benefits from having more players, and there's lots of negotiations. So how do you do that solo? So Phalanx asked me to do a kind of a solo version, which I did try, and it was just absolutely rubbish. So Marius, who's a chap at Phalanx, one of their developers, and Voldemar, they worked on this solo version. And when they sent it to me, I mean, it just blew me away. They, ideas in there that I would never have thought of doing, and it plays really well. I mean, I played it several times, and struggled to beat it. I could beat it on its easiest level, but as soon as you got to like the medium level, it's really tough to beat, and really good experience. Obviously, there's no negotiations involved because there's no one to talk to, but all of the mechanics, all of the gameplay, all the
you
same.
certainly could talk to yourself.
You can talk to yourself, and I often do. Yeah, absolutely.
I do it all the time, and even when I'm with people, I talk to myself because they don't listen to me. But sorry, I interrupted. But yeah, it's one of the things that is just a realism of our hobby is that a lot of gamers buy games, they stack them up. Sometimes gamers are not the most social people. I think that's why miniatures are different. There's that social aspect of, the aesthetics. Like, why paint if you're going to just play alone? But war gamers, they tend to buy games and they play games solo, or they play them on Vassal. I notice you have a TTS mod, which is also brilliant with this. But, that is just great marketing on Phalanx's behalf. Like, well, what do most war gamers do? They're not social. Some of them don't shower regularly. We should throw in a solo version of the game. I was curious, like when they approached you with that, what was your first reaction?
My very first reaction was, I don't think this will be possible to do. And they kind of said, yeah, it will be. So, I thought, well, let's try then. But it was beyond me. I think to be a good designer of a solo mode or a solo game, you've got to have a certain kind of mindset. And I don't think I have that. I think you've got to kind of know your own design limitations. I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm not good at. So, what I'm not good at, I'm very happy to let other people step in and do that, because there's so many really talented people out there. As I say, Voldemar and Marius just blew me away with their ideas. So, I'll take my hats off to them, and I'm quite happy to let them put that forward, because it is really good.
Yeah, I was talking earlier this morning with Liz Davidson, who runs Beyond Solitaire podcast. And I told her about this, but she's teaching Latin as we speak. Well, but she wishes she was here. And I always go like, hey, what's like new in, solo games? And David Thompson, who's done some really good solo games himself, really has a knack. He has a good engine that he keeps going to. But, I think with solo games, Dan Verson, the Leader Series solo games, I think they're onto something. And I noticed, like, when the latest DVG Kickstarter hit, it almost is like the same numbers filling, up the Kickstarter at the same time. So solo games have this loyalty to them that I think is interesting.
Yeah, I backed David Thompson's. It's Postman, soldiers in Postman's uniforms or something.
Yeah, we might get that in a couple of months.
Yeah, I backed that one. I'd like to get Castle Litter, but I haven't been out. I didn't get it on the Kickstarter. I've been trying to track down a second-hand copy, but I haven't been able to get one yet. But I'd like
tell
to
you what, I will get you in touch with David.
Ah, right. Thank you.
And you know what he'll end up saying? He'll say, it just came out digitally on Steam. So, but yeah, he's a great guy, and there's just something about the solo games. They seem to have this loyalty, and it's looking at the market and knowing like, well, this is what most gamers do. And recently, I was on this phone call with a lot of software types, PC type war games, and I said, what cracks me up is that you guys have not knocked out that solo game market yet. And, just like, because when I thought that, a lot of PC games would be hitting, that would be the first thing to die out would be the solo games, because I don't have to set it up. Like I love playing. I played Vento Nuovo's Stalingrad, and that was easier to set up. But like playing B-17 Leader, it's a great game. It took me way too long to set up, and I need more table space in my house.
Yeah.
To keep it out there. So now a crazy question. So it seems that you've played a lot of Napoleonic games, which, if you go back to our roots, everybody was playing Napoleonic toy soldiers 100 years ago and making games out of them. What attracted you most about the period? And out of all the Napoleonic wars, battles, era, which is your favorite and why?
Okay, it's quite a big question, isn't it? So,
sorry about that. Yeah.
That's
one good question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, I think what attracted me to the Napoleon, I mean, the very first thing that attracted me was I was in Windsor as a very young teenager, and in a junk shop I saw some lead soldiers in the window. I had no idea what they were. I knew nothing about the Napoleonic period or anything, and just went in there, and they were like really cheap. It was just a junk shop, just selling some stuff off, and I bought these about 5 soldiers, took them home and thought, well, this is interesting. I'm going to find out more about this. So then I started, looking at War Games magazines and finding out more, and that's what started me off. And I got a British Army and a French Army from Essex Miniatures, which is a company in Britain. I think you might have heard of them.
Oh yeah.
So I painted those up and started playing with them. So that was back in the 1980s. And then what sort of really attracted me, I think, is the whole kind of the interaction between the cavalry, the infantry, and the artillery, in the way that kind of no one is completely dominant and can beat the others in every situation. It's a bit like the rock paper scissors thing. Each one has got its benefits and its drawbacks. And to play well, you have to really integrate all three and use all three together to the best advantage, and trying to create that situation on the tabletop is difficult, especially when your opponent's trying to stop you from doing it. So it's that kind of puzzle, that kind of trying to get all your troops to the point of decision at the right time with the right type of troops there. That was absolutely fascinating. Because they're all those 3 arms were so different in the Napoleonic period. They were it was so black and white, the differences between them. So that's what really got me into it, I think. And then probably the campaign that I probably have most interested and read most about and enjoyed kind of learning about the most is the 1809 Austrian campaign on the Danube.
Really?
I really like. I mean, fortunately, living in England, we're not that far away, so I've been over to Bavaria and I've actually walked it. I walked the course with me and my wife. I told her we was going on a walking holiday. She didn't know we was following the route of Fourth Corps. so basically, we walked around all of the battlefields in the opening stages. Started in Radersburn and sort of moved down and went to Abelsberg and Teugenhausen and through to Eckmore and Landschlet, and walking the battlefields is just really fantastic. Especially Eckmore, I'd say Eckmore is one of the most unchanged battlefields that I've seen. It's very rural, kind of farming area, and we spent the whole day effectively walking through it, walking through the woods where the French came out on the Austrian right, and going over the hills where the Bavarian batteries were set up facing the Austrians and so on. And everything is virtually the same. There's the same farm buildings. There's a few little tiny country roads, and that's it. So you really get an appreciation of exactly what was going on, the lie of the land, and everything. It was fantastic. One of the best kind of history gaming war game type days I've had of my life. I think it was just a wonderful experience. I'd recommend anybody to go to Eckmore if they get a chance.
Never been.
Sorry,
I never been. I have gone to Waterloo. I was surprised how small it was. Knowing the scale of battles, because living in Europe, you really have to, as a historian, go find that, because sometimes it's not very well marked. Where if you've been to any U.S. Civil War battlefield, Revolutionary War, we throw so many statues and monuments, we make a mockery out of it. But I remember, when I was stationed in Europe, we took a staff ride to Waterloo, and I've read so much about. So I'm a junkie. If Wellington was there, I love it, and he's my favorite guy. When we were, doing teleworking, my avatar was the Iron Duke, and people go, "Who is that?" Thomas Jefferson, because if I tell you who it is, you're not going to know. And I work with military people. Just because his sayings were awesome, and I quote him all the time. But going there and just seeing how small it was, and because I expected larger, but looking how intimate it was, and knowing that on this ridge, this is where Napoleon made all his decisions, and he couldn't see during the artillery, the British over the other side of the ridge, and I thought it was hard to see what was going on at La Haye Saint and Hougoumont from that vantage point. Like you could see activity there, but like, how do you gauge and just how war was fought there? The general had to see it.
You're absolutely right. The amount of space between La Haye Saint and Hougoumont, and you think, all of the infantry squares formed on that reverse, or all the different brigades that were there, and all the cuirassiers coming across to them, and you think, how the hell did they all fit in? There's no room for them.
I have no idea.
Yeah, insane, absolutely insane.
And I think that's fantastic. And I wish I had more time in Spain to go to some of those battlefields. Those you really have to search for. For some strange reason, or even in Portugal, it's good being in NATO because we get to go to all these places, but being a junkie of especially the 100 Days campaign, and the whole backstory behind that, and and then Wellington going up through Spain, I thought was amazing. Any book that quotes him heavily, I love. And his that man there, the scum of the earth, that that's what we owe our I'm misquoting him, sorry. Sorry, Wellesley, but he was such an amazing, larger than life figure. And he's just, and when I lived in Italy, I was stationed in Italy for a while, and I wanted to go to Marengo, but once again, you really have to go seek that stuff out when you're there. But it's such a rich history, and I'm going to apologize for most Americans. We just don't know that much about it, because here's a little funny joke. When we hear the 1812 overture, we think it's about our War of 1812 with you guys.
Right.
And folks out there, research the history. Well, anyway, if you're listening to this and that's what you think, you got some other problems. But it's, my dogs must hear something. See, that's where people say, wait, hold on. You guys aren't in the studio? No, I'm at my house. I remember going to the Military History Museum in Paris, and they have that graphic of it, and you could get it online, and it shows like thickness, the amount of troops Napoleon had, and it gets thinner as he gets to Moscow and then comes back. And that is, I think, I don't know if that individual that did that, the graphic artist, like knew like how that represents that campaign. I could tell the story from that picture as opposed to any other single graphic. And I just think it's rich history. And that's why, game developers here like Sam, who really, Sam's an educator, so his games are so well researched and he really has interesting tactics. I think he brings, the Civil War to life, and I'm no sorry, the Napoleonic Wars to life, and he has different games that do it in different scales, and I just think it's amazing. Now I've heard of the company level game, but I got to tell you, Empires, I was always really scared to play that, and the fact that you said it took you and your brother-in-law a year, yeah, it's probably going to stay that way.
Yeah, well, you could play the rules are called Empire, and I played that. They had 5 editions of it. I played the 5th edition Empire, and so it's at battalion level. And so if you wanted to have an evening game, you'd effectively play 1 division each. You'd have a French division against the British division. That would be the sort of scale that you could do in 3 or 4 hours. But anything more than that, and you couldn't cope.
Yeah, it's just moving around too much stuff, and it's the problem with war gamers. Excuse me, we tend to like to talk too much, and moving around divisions and corps. But I saw, we were for everybody here. It's like if I do sound tired, it's because I was up with some folks talking about wargaming until 2 o'clock in the morning. We were talking about how World War III games are just all popular, and I said, it's funny, despite the fact that there's always like a new fad in wargaming, Napoleonic games are coming out now, including coalitions with interesting mechanics, a new way to look at the conflict. Not saying what the guys at Avalon Hill and SPI did were bad. It was that they're finding new ways to game it, and I think that's amazing. There was a company that put out, speaking of Marengo, they put it out where you have to build these little plastic pieces that play and their regiments, and it I still haven't even unboxed it yet, but it just looked innovative, and I think that's what about coalitions I think people will like, because if folks came over and I want to get them into wargaming, I would use well, are you interested in this period? Well, everybody's heard of it. To get them to sit and play a diplomacy heavy game, I think is fascinating, because I think that's a better way I can hook them than say, "Hey, this is advanced squad leader. Get your reading glasses."
Yeah.
Not to knock advanced squad leader, but
no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I think gaming evolves. As I say, I mean, in the 1990s, I absolutely loved Empire, and really the only set of Napoleonic rules I'd use. I would never play them now. If someone said, "Do you want to have a game of Empire?" I'd be like, "Well, why would you want to now?" As I say, like Sam's new rules, Lazelle. I've played those for the last 3 or 4 weeks. Great rules. Actually on last Monday, we played a Napoleon in Egypt game based around the Battle of the Pyramids, and Lazelle handled them really well. On his Honours website, you can get a download with non-European armies on their some army lists, which we used to set up the Mamelukes and the Ottoman sort of. We slightly fudged it a bit. It wasn't purely a Mameluke army. We did have some Ottomans in there as well, just to try and give them a chance. But it was a great game, and Lazelle did it really well. And you could never have done that with Empire. So games evolve. You've got to keep looking at new things, I think.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. I think for gamers looking at the period, that if you want to game a certain aspect of the period, there's like a Rule 34 that it is out there with Napoleonics. If you want to do corps size battles, and I think the popularity, and I hate to go back to the PC game Napoleon at War. Yeah, that's a twofold game. You have the battles, which are beautiful, but it is the moving around, the diplomacy, and how that whole thing works is the beauty of that game. And I'm like, gee, it's somebody should design a game like that. And I'm glad you did, because I think folks will like this. I think sometimes you want to get away from that heavy rules burdened type of game and play a little Napoleonic diplomacy. And we both like Here I Stand, which is another game, and to be honest, not my part of history I know a lot about, or even like 30 Years War, but if it's a good game, I'll play it. but the interaction from that game, and that's why I asked the question before. We doing this in secret? Well, no, it's all up front, and the way that mechanic works is, you kind of have to check your opponent because you
Mm.
don't want him getting way too many. And the way that the whole economy system works, that economy mechanic in the game, I think is great. It
Yeah.
looks like a really fun game, and
Yeah.
I'm checking to see if more people are buying it as we talk.
Right. I mean, it is a game that completely self-balances because it's negotiation and diplomacy and so on. You're constantly looking to use the weaker player to help you because you're not worried about helping them so much. You're not going to choose the strongest player because you don't want them to get any stronger. So you're constantly looking at doing deals with a weaker player to aid you, which is constantly bringing the weaker player back up again. And so the game constantly self-balances, and everyone's always in the game all the time. And when I was designing the game, one of my core kind of design ideas, or not ideas, but core part of the design was when we were playtesting, I was really only interested in watching the emotions of the people that were playing. I didn't really care much about what was going on the board, actually, like who was moving where and who was doing what. I just wanted to see what emotions it elicited amongst the players. And what I was after is like everyone having a kind of a banter and a good time, and people are trying to do deals, and it's all good-hearted, and people are saying, "Don't help them, help me," and all this kind of thing. And that was the core sort of driving idea behind the game. A game where everybody's involved all the time. Everybody, even when it's not your turn to do something, you're still involved, and there's lots of talk and there's lots of negotiation, and everyone's emotions are high. That was the thing I was trying to achieve. So you're not all sitting there in silence looking at your own kind of little grid and doing your little thing and then seeing what other people are doing. Everyone's involved with everyone all the time.
People hate playtesting with me because I bring a process approach to it, because maybe I have OCD, and maybe because I'm a former ORSA type guy. But one of the things I do in my playtesting, and you hit upon it, is I put the players in as the experiment. That I watch seasoned wargamers play a game to see where they looked at the rule book, what questions they had, the interaction, and then I take novices to that type of game, and I do the same thing. And as somebody that's done playtesting for developers and designers, I find that fascinating, and I write usually when I hand back, here's my notes from playtesting, and it's, God, I hope they read it because they tend to be a little long. I put in that reaction, and I think that is so important when you're designing a game, because sometimes what is not said, I think you could pick up on, and try to improve a mechanic. And the other part is, is the game fun? Are they having a good time? What's the banter like? Is somebody smack talking? I find that fascinating. It seems like you found that fascinating too in playtest.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most interesting playtests I had is I've got a 21-year-old daughter who actually did some of the original graphic design on my prototypes. So she plays a few board games. She's definitely not a war gamer, but she's played a few board games. She was interested in the game because she'd helped me with the map. And so there's basically 5 people from the Guildford Club. I was playing myself, plus 4 other hardened war gamers that have been war gamers for like 20, 30 years plus, and my daughter, making up the 6 players. And so we're all watching each other, trying to work out who's going to win, And we totally discounted my daughter. And she was playing Austria. It is like the hardest country because you're completely surrounded by everyone. She was playing Austria. We're all hardened war gamers. She won the game because we all just totally discounted her. We all thought, oh, well, she's never going to win. We don't need to worry about her. And she just snuck through and won it. And it just goes to show, and everyone had such a great time, but it just goes to show because she continually kind of played weak and said, oh, don't attack me kind of attitude, and people were nice to her, and she won. You think, okay, which I was really pleased about because it shows that, your attitudes towards other players will decide whether you win or lose.
It also shows that she was able to pick the game up, understand the mechanics, and win the game. And I can tell you from reading the rules, there's a lot of nuance here. There's a lot of stuff under the hood with the game. So I love designers that do that because they're putting in all the flavor and the entire context of what is going on, but it's not like Advanced Squad Leader where I need a ream of paper to print the rules. I think that's cool. And since we've been talking, just in the last 5 minutes, 2 more people bought in. So,
Cool.
and I just put a thing that I'm talking to you, and like this really sounds like a good game. But yeah, it's that whole design process in playtesting. One interesting thing that you mentioned, and I hope people picked it up, is this has been a project that you've been working on for quite a while.
Oh yeah, I started in 2017. So August 2017, I kind of came up with the concept. I mean, basically my first idea was I had this idea of I wanted a kind of a win-win mechanic where people had to negotiate, where both sides were gaining something, and you had to decide who was gaining the most. That was my first idea. I didn't really know how I was going to sort of take that forward, but that was my idea. I cobbled together a bit of a game. I played with a couple of friends from the War Games Club. They kind of liked the idea of it, but you obviously need a lot of working on. So I spent a couple of months kind of getting it into an actual game that worked. And then through 2018, basically all year, every week we played coalitions with different groups of people, different player counts, and just keep on refining it, different iterations, just making it better and better and better. So it was over a year. I mean, God knows how many play tests we got. It was, way 50 plus, I was playing at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. Before I got to the stage where I thought, okay, well, this is now good enough to show to a publisher. And that's when I sort of looked at approaching Phalanx with it. So yeah, a lot of play testing and development before it even went to Phalanx. And Phalanx have had it for 2 years, developing it for 2 years. And they've done a lot of development. They've kept all the structure of the game the same, but they've really, really improved, the fine tuning of it.
So anybody that thinks that they could churn out a really good game in like 15 minutes, you may come up with the idea in 15 minutes. It'll be totally wrong, but it takes years. And from just looking at the game itself, I think it paid off. So usually people start getting tired of my voice within an hour. So we're coming up on that. So I do have a couple last questions. One is, as you were designing this game, what was the hardest thing to put in the game, and then what was a eureka moment where you kind of went back to the drawing board, rethought, and created a new mechanic to put in the final version or the current version of the game?
Okay.
We got time.
Yeah. So
doing most of the talking.
Yeah. So the second part, the eureka moment, I think really was when. Because to start off with, I was kind of floundering with victory conditions. I tried all sorts of things like, taking Paris, which is an obvious one, but having victory conditions for the French is really tough. So initially I kind of thought about, well, okay, if you can expel all of the British armies from the continent of Europe, and, I just sort of went round in circles, and there was all pretty rubbish kind of victory conditions. And I didn't have any of these disputed regions. I just had each nation with its own territories and a few kind of neutrals. And I think the eureka moment was when I realised that, if you create in all the historic, sort of flare-up places where there was disputes on borders between nations, if you put all those areas on the board, and then mark them as disputed between those nations that were, disputing them, and allow them to gain influence or victory points for controlling those, then all of a sudden you've kind of got a situation where potentially everyone's against everyone because, I don't know, let's say, for example, both Russia and Prussia may want to be in the British coalition, but at the same time, both of them want to control Warsaw. And if they're both in the coalition, they can't fight each other for control of Warsaw. So
that turn.
Yeah, that turn. So one of them's got to leave the coalition and perhaps to fight it, or what you do is you try and grab Warsaw really quickly and then join the same coalition as the Russians are in, so they can't fight you to take it back. So there's this kind of whole negotiation and posturing and changing of position around the disputed territories on your borders. So some turns it's going to pay you to be in the British coalition and help everybody else, and sometimes it's just not, which is very much a situation between, say, Austria and Prussia during the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, the Prussians were in, I think, the second coalition and the sixth coalition, but they weren't in all the rest of them. I think I might have said that wrong. There was the 1806 coalition. Was that? That's the fourth coalition.
We have a lot of American listeners. They won't know the difference, to be honest.
They won't care.
Yeah.
But basically, Austria and Prussia were really wary of each other and really didn't want to cooperate with each other, even though you might think they're both Germanic and would both be on the same side, but they really weren't. They were quite happy to see the other one fail. And so, that's in the game as well. The Austrian player and the Prussian player, if they've seen the other one losing, but it's to their advantage, then they're quite happy with that kind of thing. So that was the eureka moment, I think, deciding on these disputed territories and getting those on the board. And then, sorry, the first part of your question, I've forgotten that. It was so long ago. What did you say about that?
Well, Schadenfreude is always good in games. If I'm not going to win, I'm telling you, you're not going to win. What was the hardest thing to develop for the game?
Hardest thing to develop? Gosh. I really think the hardest thing was getting the game to actually work in the first place as a game, in those first few months. When you've got a few ideas, you got the principles, you got the ideas. I had the enabler mechanic. I knew what I wanted to do then. I knew I wanted people to change coalition, but getting it actually to work on a map and it be playable, it's really tough. And it took me quite a few iterations to even make a playable game out of it. And constantly changing things. The map changed, the way the players interact changed quite a lot in those first few times. And I think I'd say that is probably the hardest thing is that initial step, going from your initial idea to actually having a kind of a playable prototype that actually, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it can actually play. You can put it in front of someone, they can play it and say, that's really rubbish because of this, 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 and this. But, you've got to get to that stage where they can say this is really rubbish. You've got to get something down to show them. And it's difficult, I'd say.
And I think it's the benefit when you play test to get folks that don't know anything about the history, that just understand gaming in general, to kind of test out those mechanics. But, from reading the rules, a lot of work's been put here. And I think this is a very interesting game. So I'm going to get down to our standard questions we ask everybody. And, there's no right answers.
Okay.
What period of conflict or history is not gamed enough, and why should it be gamed more? And I believe it or not, sounds like I wrote that down, but I didn't.
Okay, well, I'll take two periods that are very close together that I find really interesting is the Spanish Civil War and the Russian Civil War. And there are games out there about it, but I don't think there's that much about it. I think they're Canadian. There's a Canadian war games group called the Perfect Captain. They've got a website where you can download some rules, and they do some Russian Civil War rules called Red Action, which are very good. But
yes.
And the Spanish Civil War. And I think civil wars and the proximity to now, perhaps that's why there's not so many games on those subjects. But I find both of those periods really interesting, and I've tried to game them in lots of different ways. Actually, I find those great.
Yeah, I find Spanish Civil War fascinating. There are some games like Draco put out a game, Spanish Civil War. Of course they should, because they're a Spanish company. I think the hard part with people that don't know a lot about it, it's you could pick one of two sides: the Nazis or the communists. Well, I don't like either of them. Well, but you got to pick one. But I think that's I think that's a fascinating war. There's not even a lot of books on that war.
No, and I mean, I don't know as much about it as maybe I should. But I mean, there's so many factions in there, and some of the factions that were kind of tacitly on the same side would even end up fighting each other, even though they were perhaps both on the Republican side. You'd get the anarchists fighting against the communists or something. They were both meant to be on the same side, and yet if they disagreed, they would, and so that aspect of it, I find it really fascinating for game development to look at. And there's so many factions, the Carlists and the Phalanx, and everybody that was involved. The Italians were there, the black shirts. There's just so many things, so many cogs, so many wheels going on that can all interact.
I had relatives that either fled at that time or stuck around, and as we all know, fought for the Reds. So I'll apologize for that. The other day we were talking about the Spanish Civil War, we really need a good game on that. So it's funny you mentioned, and our own Phil Bolger said something very smart. He goes, it's the only war where the losers wrote the history. And
it's interesting.
I dig that. And then the other one is the Russian Civil War. I can tell you why I think that's not gamed. I know a lot about it, but that's probably compared to my postal carrier. I probably know a little bit more than she does about that, which I didn't
Right.
ask her. But it's confusing for people, and especially
Yeah.
when you start playing the colors game. You got the greens, you got the reds, you got the whites, and I just finished. Well, I'm working on a sequel to a Great War game for miniatures. It's Blood and Valor Second Edition, and like people said, well, it has to have the East. Of course, it's going to have the East. How many factions do the Russians have? I don't know, 14. What?
Yeah.
I go, you got the Imperials, you got the, and I'm just going down. Oh, the Czech Legion, the Polish Legion. You got the Free Germans in Königsberg. It's such interesting history, and we tend to
Yeah.
read more about the political part of it than the whole military side of it. But it's like, so we put in the Polish-Russian war, war, 1920, where they fought. And people go, I didn't even know they fought. I said, you must have gone to school in America. So, yeah, enough bashing my home country. It's almost, by the time this comes out, 4th of July will have passed, and I promise you, I'll be wearing something red, white, and blue. But yeah, I agree with both of those. Those are definitely not things that are gamed enough, and they're fascinating. And I think it's the historical learning curve with a
Yeah.
lot of gamers. But if you sit down with somebody that knows those two conflicts, grab a lunch, sit, listen. It's fascinating. And then
Yeah.
the other question we always ask is, well, actually, I have two more. Aside from a game you developed, what is a game that you just love playing?
Oh, well, that varies from time to time, but I would say at the moment I'm enjoying playing Martin Wallace's Struggle of Empires, which is a really interesting game set in sort of the 18th century, I suppose, with the expansion around the world with all the different European colonial powers. I mean, it's not very PC in today's world with colonialization and so on, but it's a very interesting board game, very cleverly put together. Martin Wallace
Never
does a lot
played
of
it.
good. So you've
Heard
played
it.
it?
No, I've heard about it. I've never
Yeah.
played it.
Okay.
And I think that's more of a, once again, not to bash here. For some reason, I think those games are amazing. Just not a lot of people here say, you want to come over? Like, I was shocked when people said, you want to come over? You want to play Here I Stand tonight? Sure. What's it about? Really? I'm surprised you even like that game. I was telling the people that were into it. But yeah, it's quite an amazing game. And I'm going to have to check that one out. Let me see. I always go to Board Game Geek. Not that they sponsor us or anything, but they're good guys. And you can still buy it.
Yeah, it's a lot lighter than Here I Stand, that's for sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
the
hate
first time I played Here I Stand, I think there were 6 of us playing, and it took us virtually all day, and we did about 1.5 turns. There was a lot of learning curve. Some of the people had never played it before or even seen it before, so there was a lot of learning curve going on. But it's a huge game, an immense game.
It's a big learning curve.
Struggle of Empires you can get done in, I don't know, 3 hours.
And I of course I looked on Board Game Geek because sometimes it's a standard question I always ask, and it's really, what game are you into now? And that's the answer, because that is the hardest thing for a wargaming to answer. Well, what's your favorite? And I'm like, well, what time of day is it? What am I reading? What am I, because if I'm reading something about the Falklands, I want to play a Falklands war, and I would say both of them, and people would say, I didn't know there was anything other than 1982, which once again, education. And then I always look, because a lot of times folks will say a game that you cannot buy anymore, can't touch, for like $150.
All right.
Like Atlantic Chase. Everybody, that's an amazing game. About World War II in the Atlantic. Can't touch a copy because GMT sold out of them. So yeah, it's there's so many great games out there. And of course, our last question, because we're getting near that hour and 15-minute mark, and this is where people say, "Can't this dude shut up?" And they're talking about me. What's next?
What's next? Oh, okay. So I'm working on a couple of games, really. I've got a game about Napoleon in Egypt, which is fairly well advanced. And what I'm doing in that game is kind of exploring the effects of luck and skill on the campaign. So all the different generals and different personalities that are in, from effectively from four sides. There's the French, there's the British, there's the Mamelukes, and there's the Ottomans. And I've taken quite a few personalities from each of those sides, and they get kind of luck ratings and skill ratings, and they kind of use their luck throughout the game, and they use their skill, and they've got to make decisions about when they want to use their luck and skill and so on. And obviously, your luck can run out in the end, because that's one of the things that said so much about Napoleon going to Egypt. He was lucky to get there. He was lucky that he was lucky to get back again, and he's so much is said about how lucky he managed to be through that campaign. So I just wanted to make a game that was kind of exploring the kind of, how luck impacts on things. So it's not kind of like all throwing lots of dice and you're lucky if you get a good roll or not. It's they're kind of these traits of luck and these traits of skill and stuff. And it's not quite finished yet, so I can't say too much more about it because
that's fine. Well, you're gonna come back on and talk about it. So
that's
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're gonna have to talk to us again. So I got into a conversation way back when I had to report into this admiral. I'm in the Air Force, so I knew he didn't like me anyway. And it was actually a really good conversation. And he was telling me about a paper he wrote on Midway and, about U.S. tactics. And I'm like, let's be honest. If we weren't lucky and if the Japanese could design better ships, that would not have happened. And we got into this whole argument about it. And not argument, but it was an interesting debate. Yeah, luck has a lot to do with it. And that's the hardest thing to put in a game. So right now, I'm thinking, wow, that's going to be interesting because how do you infuse that in the game? A lot of people, like you said, think luck's dice. And then, a lot of games use that, like a black swan card that comes out and like, oh, this happens. It could be good or it could be bad. But yeah, there's so many interesting things to war game. So I'm excited for that. So we know it's not going to come out for a while, but we will definitely want to have you back. I am going to post. I've already posted on our Facebook page that I'm talking to you.
Okay.
See if anybody had any questions for you, and usually they see it's from me. They don't answer. But this is going to be out. There should be roughly 6 or 7 days left because it's Kickstarter ends on Bastille Day, I think, right, or the 13th or 14th of July.
I think it's 14th of July. Right. Yeah, 14th of July.
Bastille Day. Did you do that on purpose?
I think Yarrow might have done. Yeah, okay. He wanted to tie it in with the 200th anniversary of Napoleon's death. I know, and we had to push the date back by 3 weeks, so it was a bit frustrating. But there you go.
I didn't know he died. Now I'm feeling all broken. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know,
not a lot written about his last days, so that'd be probably kind of interesting. But yeah, it's I've been looking at the rules for a week now, and I think there's a lot of good stuff in this game, especially if you're looking for a game that's gonna tell an old story in a new way. And I think anytime that you have this collective game with a beautiful map, these figures look good, man. If you're thinking about buying it, go with the figures, because I'm going to try to get your figures painted for you. The other part of it too is the card. It has card mechanic. The cards look beautiful as art. So I don't know who the artist is, but that's why I'm happy Yarrow contacted me, because I think more people should be playing his games. But yeah.
So the art's done by a chap called Bartek for Phalanx. He works with Phalanx. I think it's Bartek Yeryetsky, I think his surname, but I've probably just murdered that. So
yeah, it's if you go to their website, I will put a link to both the Phalanx website and the Kickstarter. But Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. This was it was a lot of fun. Anytime somebody's willing to talk to us, we appreciate this. And I think this is going to be, a game I think people will really enjoy. And I'd say I wish you luck on the Kickstarter, but I'm going for the fact that this is going to go over 1,000. Wow, it's 2 more in just the last minute. Just back the game. So you're not checking it every day, I bet.
No, only about every 10 minutes.
Are you really? Yeah, it's
I look at it most days, but yeah, it can become a bit obsessive, so you have to be careful.
yeah, I know. I helped somebody with a Kickstarter campaign, and I said you need to throw your computer away. How long was it funded in? How long did it take to fund?
I think it was 2 days. I think it took to fund,
Which
about
is
48 hours.
that's pretty good, especially
Yeah, that's
for
good.
a company that not a lot of people, I think, in the United States know about Phalanx, and probably a big part of the world because I think they're growing and up and coming board game company. But 2 days
Yeah,
is pretty good.
yeah, I was very pleased. Yes.
I know you were like, "Oh, thank God," and then
Exactly.
yeah, it looks like you're going to crush your goal. So I'm not going to jinx it by asking you what the final number is going to be because I already probably jinxed it by mentioning it. But sir, thank you so much. And
Well, thank you, Mick.
of course, everybody asked the question afterwards, like, "What would you guys talk about when the thing went off?" I said, "That's a secret. I don't tell that." But yeah, thanks so much. I think.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh nope,
It's been a
no
pleasure.
problem.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna turn it back to Sean in the studio, and look for the link below. Check out this game. Check out Phalanx Games. Not a huge catalog, but everything they turn out seems to be quality. And just for the fact that they've been working on this game for so long, which I think they do for all their games, yeah, check them out. And like as Yarrow said, we have some exciting stuff coming out, and hopefully we'll get those guys on too. So I'm going to turn it back to the studio. And you know where to find us, and hit us up on the forums or on Facebook if you have any questions.
Thanks so much for joining the show tonight. Remember to follow us on Twitter at No Dice, No Glory, and keep the conversation going on NoDiceNoGlory.com, now featuring our own message boards. Have a great night, everybody.